Hello, everybody. Hope you had a good holiday. I'm recording on a new webcam that was given to me for Christmas by my mod and friend Double-Edged Cat. Trying out this webcam. The frame rate may not be great. I still have some things to work out. This is really my very first time using it. I like the color. I had to adjust it quite a bit. The lipstick that I'm wearing is actually pink, and it looks red, so I have some work to do. Getting used to this, I think. But I guess I wanted the option of recording in higher fidelity. I do like the lo-fi look. It's nostalgic, and I feel like it feels more genuine because there's no artifice. It's just artifice as in there's no like high production value. I'm not pretending to be a pro necessarily. I'm just talking to you, and the focus is on what I'm saying more than what it looks like. But at the same time, going forward, I want to put a lot more effort into writing, and I would like to have the option of recording higher fidelity video without setting up the DSLR. I don't find that for the kinds of videos that I make, the DSLR is always the right option. And with the day job, having the option of just sitting down and recording straight to the hard drive as opposed to needing to worry about batteries or SD cards. This works very well for me. So I'm experimenting. The lo-fi aesthetic is not necessarily gone for good, but it is a choice now rather than a necessity. This is also going to be the last of the monthly bonus videos. In January, I will work out a calendar, what days in each quarter I'm going to be releasing a bonus video, and how topic suggestions and voting will work on a new schedule. And I'm kind of putting that off until January because with the holidays, I can't sit down and work that all out right now. So just being honest, I don't know yet. I'm working on it. I was honestly so excited that the topic that won this month is my gaming unwrap, me going over all of the games that I played this year, because this was a very unusual year in gaming for me. I typically hyper-focus on one game, and I play that at the exclusion of everything else. But this year I've been very curious and I've explored a lot of different games and kind of expanded my media diet. Just sought out a lot of things that were new to me or games that I had tried in the past and never finished. So in all, I played 22 games this year, which has to be some kind of record for me. I don't normally keep track, but that's gotta be a lot of games in my life. I didn't complete all of them. For this, the purposes of this video, I'm mostly going to go over games that I finished or that I played a significant amount of because I have a lot to say about a lot of them, and I don't usually get this outlet to talk about what I'm currently playing and what's fresh and new in my mind like this, so I'm very excited. I initially wrote 16 pages and then ended up cutting some things just so that I wouldn't be recording for a ridiculous amount of time. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first game that I'm going to talk about is Pokemon Go, and that is because I played it all year. I got back into Pokemon Go in 2024. Maybe the winter of 2024 was when I started making the pedometers video and when I kind of got back into Pokemon Go. And then I played it through the summer of 2024, and then this whole year has just been a Pokemon Go year for me in 2025. Initially, I began playing Pokemon Go in 2016, kind of on and off. I had my biggest gap in the pandemic, where like from 2020 to 2024, I didn't touch it at all. So when I got back into the game last year, there was a ton of content to catch up on, and then I got re-hooked on the game. As in all things, the Pokedex and completing the Pokedex is like the thing that I love doing the most, so I've completed my Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Unova dexes in Pokemon Go. I missed the Sinnoh event where you had the opportunity to catch the lake spirits that were not native to your region, because the lake spirits are extremely rare encounters, and they're also regional. So I am missing Uxie and Mesprit. I have Azelf, and I had the opportunity at the end of this year to get Mesprit, but it fled from me, so that sucked. Anyway, in November 2024, they added the D-Max and G-Max mechanics to the game, which are kind of like a separate mode that sit on top of the regular Pokemon Go gameplay, and all of the rewards feed back into the D-Max battles, which are not typical raid battles. So for the D-Max battles, particularly with D-Max legendary Pokemon, you want to have a strategy and you need to invest quite a bit of resources into the D-Max Pokemon that you have in order to take them down, and you'll need 4 people at least on a team to coordinate with, and it's kind of a deeper mechanic than the base Pokemon Go gameplay. My husband Chaz was much more into the D-Max stuff than I was at first. I sort of wasn't into it immediately, but he became hooked on it right away because it's exactly up his alley. I had the opportunity to catch a G-Max Blastoise when the mode was brand new, and in the winter this year, there was a group of 10 or so people near where I was volunteering, and I sprinted 2 blocks in order to join them to catch a G-Max Blastoise, which I gave to Chaz, and that really got us both super addicted to it. So from then on, we began regularly attending local campfire events. I also did a lot of travel this year, which I haven't in a while, so I went to Japan in March and April and caught a lot of exclusive Pokemon in Japan, like the Japanese Oricorio. And there are some other exclusives that I got in Japan, but they've all been released recently as part of other events outside of Japan. So nobody wants anything but the Japanese Oricorio from Japan, so it's fine. It's whatever. I have just a ton of Farfetch'd and Zangoose and Blue Shellos and Blue Petal Flabebe in case I meet anyone who wants them someday. And then in August, Pokemon hosted me for an official meet and greet at the 2025 World Championships in Anaheim, California, and I got a bunch of souvenir Pokemon there, and I got to take part in the premiere of the D-Max finale where they released Eternatus, so I got to be one of the first people in the world to catch Eternatus, and I was featured in a Pokemon Go commercial on YouTube for like less than a second. Sort of as a side effect of being so invested in D-Max all year, we have quite a collection of D-Max Pokemon that we've invested in, and G-Max Pokemon builds up now. And so nothing that they release can really rival what we already have in terms of usefulness or challenge. So because of this, we've sort of slowly become less invested in D-Max as the year has worn on. But I am still looking forward to them finally releasing G-Max Meowth in 2026. So I did play games in January, but I'm going to start with February because that is the first game that I have a lot to say about that I played, which is the Tomb Raider Classic Collection, which consists of The Last Revelation, Chronicles, and Angel of Darkness, I believe. So I haven't really gotten to talk about Tomb Raider a ton in the past. I grew up with the Tomb Raider games, kind of. I had every single one on PlayStation, but I didn't have a memory card for the PlayStation for a very long time. It was one of those things where my parents didn't understand that I needed one and were not really invested in my hobby enough to see that I couldn't make progress in any of the games that I owned. I played the first levels of all of the Tomb Raiders over and over and over again and never saw past them. The Tomb Raider games are designed to be very difficult games in general. When they were released on PC, they had a feature where you could save anywhere, but on console, you can only save at mid-level checkpoints, and you can only use the checkpoints if you have a memory card. So it's designed to be very difficult to finish anyway on console, and with no memory card, it was just impossible to see more than the first 3 levels. When the first classic collection of Tomb Raiders 1 through 3 was released last year in the winter, that was my first time finishing any Tomb Raider games. Tomb Raider 1 stood out as the best of the first 3 games. It's very polished. It has a lot of classic 3D platforming, exploration, and puzzle solving. It's very similar to 3D Zelda, actually, just with tank controls and some auto-targeting for the weapons, which I find to be more intuitive than Z targeting. In the re-release of the games, you actually can change the control scheme to a modern control scheme. So if the tank controls are a roadblock to you for enjoying the game, you can actually switch to something that is a little bit more modern, where you can just lead Lara in the direction you want her to go and she'll go and do it. I grew up obviously with the tank controls, so that's what I was used to. And I find that the levels are really designed around them. So a lot of the challenge of the levels comes from the controls and just how difficult it is sometimes to get from point A to point B. So for me, tank controls are still the way to go. Tomb Raider 2 I actually found to be much less fun than Tomb Raider 1. I almost dropped the game entirely at the Venice level because Tomb Raider 2 is way more combat heavy than the first game. It's sort of like if there was a sequel to Ocarina of Time, except the focus of the game was going around shooting humanoid enemies with the slingshot all the time, and a limited quantity of Deku Nuts. I really struggled early in the game where you don't have a lot of ammo or different weapons or health packs to work with. But once I got later in the game and saw some of the late levels, like the 40 Fathoms, Wreck of the Maria Doria, basically that whole underwater section. Those levels are much bigger with much more spread out combat, and you get some of that more fun exploration that was in the first Tomb Raider games. But overall, it's much more a game about managing resources and shooting people, which I'm sure was very popular with teenage boys in the 90s, but is not really what I'm personally looking for in a platformer. But it did get better overall, and I would say that once I finished the game, I did enjoy it. It was just kind of a rough transition from the first Tomb Raider into the second. Tomb Raider 3 is my least favorite of the first 3 games. It's really the Banjo-Tooie of Tomb Raiders, if that makes any sense to you. So Tomb Raider 1 had more linear dungeon progression in most of the levels, where you don't really have to worry about doing any backtracking in the majority of them, or at least not significant amounts of it. Going back to my Zelda comparison, however, Tomb Raider 3 is like if every level in the game was the water temple. So you constantly have to backtrack and go back across the same rooms over and over and over again. You'll go through like 8 rooms of a level, and then find a key that opens something in room 3. So you'll go back to room 3, and in room 3, you'll find something that opens a door in room 1. So you have to go back to room 1, and in room 1, there'll be a key to something in room 8. So you gotta go all the way back through the whole level again. And that's every level. This is overall not my favorite kind of platforming design. I did get through it, but I was relying on Stella's Tomb Raider walkthroughs much more for 3 than I did for 1 or 2, just because the levels themselves were already so tedious that I really couldn't have them dragged out by me making any more mistakes. So the first 3 Tomb Raiders were all in 2024, and I started the second Classic Pack in February with Tomb Raider 4, The Last Revelation. This was one of the games that I enjoyed replaying the first level of the most as a child, because the tutorial level of Tomb Raider 4, you start by playing as a young Lara Croft who rips her backpack off of a corpse, adventuring right out of the womb. I just thought it was so novel to play a video game where you got to play as a young girl. Captured my imagination a lot as a kid, and because I couldn't see more of the game, I had no idea what the rest of the game was like. Revisiting it now as an adult, I felt it was kind of a breath of fresh air. They had to release a ton of Tomb Raider games, one after the other, after the other, after the other. There really was kind of no time like the late 90s for this sort of thing where you make one video game and then you just release a ton of iterations on the same engine really quickly in succession. Like they did this with Tomb Raider, with Spyro. It must have been hell for the people working on these games, but for me as a young kid, I was just like, wow, I get to have even more of this thing I already like so soon. But with Tomb Raider, you did kind of feel the decrease in quality over time. So going back to Tomb Raider 4 actually kind of felt like a refresh of the series. They had some different people working on the games by this point because the original people who had made the first 3 Tomb Raiders had all gotten fed up and left at various points along that journey. So the individual levels in Tomb Raider 4 are much more linear, like Tomb Raider 1, with less tedious repetition and shooting people, and more just exploration and puzzles to solve. But there is a non-linear order to do the levels in, where there's kind of like a hub area that acts as a level select, where you locate the entrance to each individual level. And there are some hidden things within some levels that unlock stuff in other levels, so there is some backtracking. I did end up putting the game down before finishing it at the beginning of the year, because I got into doing that volunteer work at the beginning of last year, and it ended up being something that I couldn't sustain and volunteer at the same time. And because there are things that you need to do in kind of a non-linear way once you get into Tomb Raider 4, it's been sort of intimidating to go back to because I'm not sure I can remember exactly what I was doing, what I was looking for to open what door in which level. There's kind of more to keep track of in that way in Tomb Raider 4. So if I were to go back to the Tomb Raider series at this point, I may just need to start 4 over again, which, may not be a bad thing, but it is daunting enough that I haven't gone back to it. I do want to say that overall I appreciate these remastered collections. Re-releases, remakes are not typically my favorite things, so I appreciate when it's done well. You can play the games in their original design with basically no frills. The original controls and graphics can be toggled on and off at will, so there are some areas in the original games that are much darker that in the new graphics are a little bit brighter, so you can toggle the graphics to see a little better. Or if you're using modern controls and graphics, sometimes you can toggle to old graphics and things might be better lit there. And there are some parts of Tomb Raider 3 in particular that made me very motion sick in the original graphics. There's kind of a lot of camera bob that you can't really do anything about. But the modern graphics don't have that problem. So I played almost all of 3 using modern graphics as an accessibility feature. So that was really great. So yeah, overall, I do recommend the Asper re-releases of Tomb Raider. I think it's a good series that's often overlooked by Nintendo fans because it wasn't marketed as a Nintendo game and for that audience. So understandably, people who liked, Mario might not be interested in it, but the gameplay is really pretty similar to a Zelda, at least in Tomb Raiders 1 and 4. Maybe not 2 and 3. But if you were into 3D Zelda, early 3D Zelda games, you may like Tomb Raider, so give it a try. So I ended up taking a bit of a break from gaming through the spring. I went on my honeymoon, obviously, and then when I came back from my honeymoon, I was kind of in a slump. Pretty typical, I think, in most people's lives that when something that they've been really looking forward to and turned out to be very, wonderful ends, there's kind of a grieving period for it. A lot of people call it, the after-con blues or, the letdown period from, a big event in your life. Well, I kind of had that, and so I got a little depressed in the springtime following my honeymoon. I had sort of apathy for things that I typically enjoy in that time period, but video games were ultimately the thing that brought me back out of feeling kind of down. So the thing that got me back into video games in June was the release of the Switch 2 and Mario Kart World. So this was the first game of the year that I actually rolled credits on. We got this at launch with our Switch 2, and we played it a good amount. Mario Kart 8 is my favorite of all time for Mario Karts, and it's a very difficult title to improve on. The controls are very slick, they're easy to learn. There's a huge variety of different tracks. The differences between each vehicle and each part of each vehicle can be felt in handling it. So there is some depth to the gameplay despite it being very intuitive. So they did have to do something a little bit different with the next Mario Kart because they couldn't follow up 8 with just another basic Mario Kart. If the game wasn't as good as 8, then it would look poorly in comparison, and it would be really difficult to outdo something that was so polished and so great from the jump. So I think they did make a smart decision in doing something unusual with Mario Kart, and they made kind of a Forza Horizons Mario Kart. And I have to give it the credit of being so experimental. I do appreciate an experimental game, whether or not it pays off. Things I like about it. First, I like how technical the gameplay is compared to 8. 8 has a lot of accessibility features where the game can almost just play itself for you. And this was to allow, younger players to keep up with older players and still have a good time, I would assume, since Mario Kart is really a series for everyone and is a popular couch racer. World still has those options, the accessibility options that were introduced in 9 didn't go away, but with the addition of jumping and wall jumping and rail grinding, the gameplay became a lot more technical, and especially finding the best path through each level has a higher skill ceiling than it did in 8. So I do appreciate the deeper play that was introduced there, and it was a surprising direction to me to see Mario Kart go in, as a game that is typically going out of its way to be as accessible to everyone as possible, to have mechanics that are a little deeper that some people are going to master and others are not, really shakes things up a bit for Mario Kart. However, the open world gameplay of Mario Kart World is a swing and a miss for me. I don't find this open world particularly engaging to explore for its own sake, and it doesn't work particularly well for the couch racer that Mario Kart almost always is. It's much harder to learn the tracks and to intuit what you're supposed to do next when the order you do tracks in will change sort of your pathing through them and the transitions between tracks. The tracks are also very wide and in most cases very empty, with the exception of a lot of oncoming traffic that for me was sort of hard to see, hard to pay attention to, drive well, and navigate tons of different players all at the same time throwing items at you. So all in all, this was kind of a mixed bag of a Mario Kart for me, and I really didn't use the single player open world stuff in it very much because it's such a couch racer game for me that I was much more interested in playing with my husband and with my friends locally than I was in going into the open world and like doing challenges or like finding other people playing online there that I didn't necessarily know. I really only used the open world to unlock the costumes that you couldn't unlock in the Grand Prix. I do appreciate kind of the boldness of it for Mario, but he's not really interesting enough to pull off this kind of game, I think. I'm just not personally invested enough in Mario and his companions to want to explore this version of their world. So at the same time that I was playing Mario Kart World with the release of the Switch 2, on my Steam Deck I was playing To a T, which was released in June as well.
Change PJ, I want to dry my face, I want to use the restroom by myself. The little things, yeah, the little things are hard for me.
So this is Keita Takahashi's latest video game. He is the creative mind and director behind the very first two Katamari games, which are Katamari Damacy and We Heart Katamari, after which the Katamari series was sold to Namco Bandai, who were responsible for creating Beautiful Katamari and Katamari Forever, and now the latest, Once Upon a Katamari, which we will get into later. Since then, Keita Takahashi has gone on to other things. He left the Katamari series originally after just 2 games because he felt that he had done all he could do with the Katamari concept, and so since then he's really flexed his creative muscles and done a lot of different experimental games. First there was Nobi Nobi Boy, which was kind of more of an exploration of a series of mechanics than it was a game that you could complete. It was very sandboxy without a lot of real goals. Next there was Alphabet, which was an installation piece, and not a full game either. And apparently there was a game called Wadum, which this entire time I thought was the same thing as Alphabet, but it turns out is not. So I would like to now go back and play Wadum. But To a T was the first game that I was aware of, the first full game that Keita Takahashi has made since Katamari. So I was really excited to try it. In To a T, you play as a teenager who has a unique characteristic in that they are always stuck T-posing indefinitely. So they go through life like this. I can't do that in this shirt, and a shirt that would be inaccessible to this teen character. Because of this, they need special accommodations to navigate through everyday things in life. And they also have a service dog to help them do things that they cannot do for themselves. The game is episodic in nature, with each chapter telling a story, and each chapter is bookended by an opening theme song and a closing theme song.
I wake up at 3 every morning to bake the bread for sandwiches. Then I go to my tiny garden to pick the ripest vegetables. I wake up at 3 every morning to bake the bread for sandwiches. Then I go to my tiny garden. I really love my radishes.
The teen goes to school for the first time and is bullied for being different. But then they discover that because of their T-posing arms, they have a unique ability, which is to spin really fast, and that allows them to fly. Then the teen makes friends, and eventually they find out more about where they came from, and there are aliens involved, and it gets really weird because it's a Keita Takahashi game, and of course, it has to be really weird. That's what I love about it. But ultimately, the game has a very sweet message. First, about understanding people who experience life with different abilities, and then second, why perfection and complete sameness is not only not possible, but not even really desirable to try to achieve. Our differences are ultimately what gives us each a unique perspective, which gives life texture and enrichment. It is a game that I think is designed to be more appealing to younger people, but the game also resonated with me as a 32-year-old who has gone through life with some disabilities that I have needed accommodations for, as well as currently struggling with perfectionism and people-pleasing well into my 30s. It is sad that Takahashi ultimately decided to return to Japan and is questioning whether to continue in the games industry at all anymore because of To a T not finding an audience. But I enjoyed it so much that I actually platinumed it in June, which means that I went through and got every single achievement on Steam for the game. So not only did I complete it, I platinumed it. So I do recommend it really to anyone. It's a very short game, it's inexpensive, so it's short and sweet and good for you. Good for the soul. So next, in July, I started playing Baldur's Gate 3 again. So in July, I got a haircut from a hairdresser that I've been going to for years. She's also into video games, really heavily into Baldur's Gate 3, in July of this year for some reason. And she was totally obsessed with Gale. So for a very long hair appointment when I was getting foils done, she just talked about Baldur's Gate 3 the whole time. So I first played Baldur's Gate 3 in 2023, and I finished the whole game then. All 3 acts, defeated the Mother Brain, and everything. My first character was a half-elf ranger named Skalana. She's kind of selfish and a bit of a flirt, but ultimately she was kind in most of her decisions, and prioritized doing right by animals and nature. After I finished my first playthrough, I was so addicted to the game, I started another right away. My second playthrough was a Resist Dark Urge playthrough, where I was a bard high elf, I think. And this playthrough had some rules. The character was an archetype of mine that I always loved playing in all role-playing games, which is high charisma, low intelligence. So the type of character who will agree to help everyone regardless of circumstances and regardless of whether that person wants help doing something good or not. So friendly to a fault, not necessarily a good person, but always wants to help everyone. The additional caveat is that I had to get through the game by dealing as little direct damage in combat as I possibly could. So when I first started this playthrough, I didn't get very far in it. I got up to the Grove and did a few things in there, and then I put the game down for a couple of years. But when I talked to my hairdresser about the game in July, this gave me the itch to play it again, and I picked up this low to no damage playthrough once again. This is a very stupid way to play this game, and it ended up being a lot of fun. It turned every basic encounter and quest in the game into an insane logic puzzle. For example, in the Grove fight, I originally thought that I could solve this conflict in the game by freeing Saza the goblin and having Saza lead the goblin camp to the Grove, and then siding with the tieflings in the Grove and turning on Minthara at the last minute. This way the tieflings could do all the damage in combat and I would just buff them as needed. This ended up not working out as planned because the tieflings, it turns out, were mostly rangers, and the second that the giant spiders jumped up next to them, they would start trying to fire long-range weapons point blank at spiders right in front of them and do no damage whatsoever. So ultimately, I ended up intentionally placing all of the fire wine barrels in the entire game up until that point on the field in front of the Grove gate entrance, where there are buried explosives underneath the field. I cast grease everywhere before the fight started, and then to try to get the goblins that have explosives on them to blow themselves up, I would cast Crown of Madness on those goblins. It took a ton of attempts, but eventually it finally worked, and I was able to end that fight without dealing very much direct damage at all. For another example, because this character had to say yes to everything, I stumbled on a really rare cutscene in the goblin camp, where if you go with Priestess Gut into her chambers, say yes to everything, drink her potion, and then make absolutely no attempts whatsoever to escape when she ultimately ties you up and makes you a prisoner, Corilla from the House of Hope shows up and frees you and kills Priestess Gut for you. And another example of how stupid things could get in this playthrough is I wanted to free Barkus from the windmill. So I had Shadowheart sneak up behind all of the goblins, turn off the windmill, and then use a potion of invisibility to go around to the front and untie Barkus from the windmill. This alerted all of the goblins to my presence and instantly aggroed them. But my hope was that Barkus could deal damage for me in this fight. Well, Barkus has nothing equipped, no weapons whatsoever, and died in one round. Not even, maybe 2 turns of combat after being untied. So I had absolutely no choice but to just flee. So in the story of what happened, I went on a stealth mission to free Barkus, immediately got him killed, and then ran away. Someone who tries to help everyone but is not necessarily a good person. And I love that in every RPG ever, playing this character archetype who wants to help everyone but kill as few people as possible, like with their own hands, not get their own hands dirty, a lot more people end up dying. This happened in Fallout. This happens in Skyrim if you try and play this way. It happens in Baldur's Gate 3 if you try to play this way. So I played this save file up until the underbelly of Moonrise Tower, and I was telling my friends this whole time, and sometimes they would be on like a call with me and watching me play through, streaming on Steam. So they were so inspired by my antics that they wanted to do a co-op playthrough with me. So I paused my own crazy, stupid playthrough and started a co-op playthrough with 2 of my local friends. And this campaign is ongoing. Our most recent session was just last week before the holiday. In this playthrough, they're not really doing anything special because I have to play cooperatively with other people, so I'm just a Githyanki in this one, and I don't do any of the talking. I have to really credit Baldur's Gate with improving my mental health when I was depressed earlier this year. I really relate a lot to Astarion. We've been through similar things. Obviously, I'm not a vampire spawn who was tortured for 200 years, but I did go through some hard things in early life, and ultimately, no matter how good or how bad Astarion is as a person, I can always find compassion for him. I don't want to spoil Astarion's story if you haven't for some reason finished it, but ultimately you can help him break the cycle of abuse and learn to be kind to others and himself. He doesn't start the game as like a good person though. He is power-seeking and selfish and often uncaring, and a lot of players find him very frustrating because he will dislike most of the good or heroic actions you would take naturally playing an RPG. So every time you do something good, you have to see Astarion dislike that on your screen. But deep down, he has the capacity to learn, to be kind, and ultimately, regardless of whether he's personally likable, he is worthy of compassion. And this always helps me to remember to be compassionate to myself, which when you're in the throes of depression can be really hard to access sometimes. So, video games are just such an amazing tool for mental health. Stories we can inhabit and make decisions in so many ways help us be active in the decisions in our own lives. In August, I played Chibi-Robo on NSO. So I played through Chibi-Robo on NSO in August when it was first released, and I will talk about Chibi-Robo in a minute. But actually, I wanted to talk about Moon Remix RPG first, which I played after Chibi-Robo. So chronologically, I played Chibi-Robo before Moon because Chibi-Robo was re-released, and finishing it made me want to play Moon. But Moon originally was released in 1997 before Chibi-Robo, and it was made by the same people. So I will circle back to this, but I want to discuss Moon first. So in September, I played Moon Remix RPG. Hey everyone, in editing, I just wanted to pop in here and give a warning that in this next part of the video, I do summarize the entirety of the film Night on the Galactic Railroad, including the ending of the film. And I talk about the ending of Moon Remix RPG. Having seen the film, I don't believe knowing what happens in it ruins the viewing experience, as a lot of the impact of the film is in the pacing and imagery. And I talk about the ending of Moon Remix RPG in a vague way without showing footage, so that I can get across an analysis of the themes of the game. Having finished the game, I believe the way that I talk about it does not fully spoil the endings, and you may still be able to get the full impact of them, even hearing what I say about it. However, I realize that the experience of media is an individual thing, and some viewers may not want to have any information about the ending of the film or the game going in. So if you plan to see this film or play this game in the future and do not want to know what happens in them at all, please skip ahead to the timestamp on the screen. This will skip the full description of the film and the game and pick up in my discussion of Chibi Robo instead. I really do recommend experiencing both pieces of media, and I was very excited to discuss them, but it's a difficult thing to do when the endings are important and also where so much of the emotional catharsis of each work is. I just wanted to give you the choice before getting into this part. Okay, last chance to skip ahead. Now back to the video. In September, I watched the film Night on the Galactic Railroad for the first time. If you recall, this is the film that's referenced at the beginning of Pokemon Gold and Silver, and is part of my 100% completionist checklist for those games. I had never actually seen this movie before, but after finishing Moon Remix to completion, and hearing that this film actually inspired the game, I became too curious and I had to see it for myself. Night on the Galactic Railroad is a 1985 surrealist existentialist anime film based on a popular Japanese fantasy novel from the 1920s of the same name. The film opens following a cat named Giovanni. Giovanni has very few friends at school and is bullied by other cats, save for one other cat named Caponella, who is his only friend. His father is away on a fishing trip for an extended period of time and his mother is ill. On the night of an annual festival, Giovanni goes to get milk for his sick mother, while Caponella and his classmates enjoy the festivities. Then Giovanni boards a magical train that appears out of the night sky. Caponella gets on board too. The train travels through a series of parables about life and death, as different passengers board the train and tell their stories, or they pass by different scenes about this theme throughout the galaxy.
私お父さんに昔、バルドラの野原で小さな虫たちを食べて生きていた一匹のサソリの話を聞いたことがあるの。そのサソリがある日、イタチに追いかけられて井戸に落ちたとき、言うの。ああ、私は今までいくつの者の命を取ったかしれない。そして、その私が今度イタチに取られようとしたときには、あんなに一生懸命逃げた。それでもとうとうこんなになってしまった。ああ、何にも当てにならない。どうして私は私の体を黙ってイタチにくれてやらなかったろう。そうしていたらイタチも一日生き延びたろうに。どうか神様、私の心をご覧ください。こんなに虚しく命を捨てず、どうかこの次には誠のみんなの幸せのために私の体をお使いください。そうしたらいつかサソリは自分の体が真っ赤な美しい火になって夜の闇を照らしているのを見ていたんですって。
Ultimately, the uniting theme of these stories is that life is not really about your own survival at the expense of others, but rather that it's more meaningful if you spend it in the service of others. At the end of the train journey, spoilers by the way for this movie, it's really old, I am going to spoil it, but I think that it probably won't take away from your viewing experience in the movie, but just so you know, I'm about to tell you the ending. At the end of this journey, it turns out that Caponella must get off the train. Giovanni begs him not to go, but he does anyway. Then Giovanni awakens back in the town to discover that back in the village, Caponella has drowned, rescuing one of the bullies who had fallen into a river. Caponella gave up his life in service of another, which gave his short life meaning. It's a painful lesson for Giovanni, who must lose his only friend in a harsh world, but Giovanni's life is also spent taking care of his sick mother and sacrifices a lot to do that. So although it's rather sad that Giovanni loses his only friend, the ending implies that Giovanni's life is all the better for having known Campanella. So Moon Remix RPG, the video game, came out in 1997, and it's a subversion of the RPG genre that is really sort of a mechanical take on the same themes that the film Night on the Galactic Railroad is centered around. But the narrative of Moon Remix RPG is totally different. So the narrative is that there's a young boy playing a generic Dragon Quest-like RPG, where a knight hero slays a dragon after getting very strong by defeating lots of monsters. Then when his mother tells him to turn the game off for the night, he's sucked into the television and becomes a character in the story. It turns out that the RPG hero from the video game that the boy was playing is actually misguided in his mission of slaying this dragon, which will not really end the calamity that is about to befall the world. So instead, you must go around rescuing all of the monsters that the hero has gone about slaying on his quest, solving puzzles to save their souls. When you save monsters, and when you help people that live in this world, you collect love, and love allows the protagonist of the game to stay awake longer. You have to go to bed each night before you run out of energy, and getting more love increases your energy, thereby increasing the amount of time you can stay awake each day. In your dreams each night, you talk to the Queen of the Moon, who tells you you must ultimately collect love and then find a way to open the door to stop the calamity.
Trail water.
Tending to Scott.
Let me discern. Trail water. Y ahora guerra. Starting historical.
Stanisława 2, idź po polu. 2, będę mówić nad Wisłą, Wolskie. Stanisława, być może gdzie indziej, Wolskie. Stanisław.
This door is implied to be on the moon, so you have to build a rocket ship to get to the moon, and you have to solve a series of puzzles and get some items to do that as well. So mechanically, time is the main antagonist of this game. When you start, you can only be awake for a few minutes, so your first few days in the game are really, really short, and it's barely enough time to do anything. You can collect 1 or 2 love, and if you're not careful, you will run out of energy before you get back to the bed at your grandmother's house, and you'll die, and you'll have to redo those days over again. But as you collect more love, as you help people, and as you're able to catch more of the souls of the monsters that the hero slayed, you increase the amount of love, and then you're able to stay awake for days at a time. And there's in-game days of the week, so that becomes important so that you can be in the right place at the right time in the game world, witness certain events that you need to be there for to collect love. The puzzles in this game, which you need to solve in order to collect the souls of the monsters or to do a number of other things in the game, are adventure game-esque. Often you have to interact with the environment or with objects or use items throughout the world in creative ways, talk to the right people, have the right things. You get hints to the answer for each puzzle in your encyclopedia of monsters. When you find the monster's corpse in the world, it'll give you a hint as to how to free their ghosts. Or on rum-roms, which you get for completing different parts of the game. They're like little ROM chips that you can decode in a certain location that have hints drawn on them. It's a open world game, and if you're stumped, you're free to go back and try different items in different areas at different times of day, or go back to reread old hints and dialogue as many times as you need until you can finally figure out a solution to a puzzle that'll allow you to move forward in the game. Moon Remix was originally released in 1997 for the PlayStation, but only in Japan. It gained a cult following, and eventually the game inspired Toby Fox to make Undertale. After Undertale's success, Fox influenced the director Yoshiro Kimura to finally localize the game in other territories, and so it was re-released for the Nintendo Switch in 2020 and localized into English for the very first time. I tried the game originally in 2020. I got stuck at some point and put it down, and this year, after finishing Chibi Robo, I was finally inspired to go back and really finish it for real this time. Like Undertale, the ending of the game varies depending on choices that you make. However, unlike Undertale, where there's multiple different endings depending on whether you are peaceful or kill characters, in Moon, you can't kill anyone. It's not an option, and peace is your only way. Instead, the ending is broken down into one single binary choice, where you can get the good end or the bad ending. If you get the bad ending, you can then immediately reset the game and get the good ending instead. So I feel like you're meant to actually get both endings. Players are typically naturally inclined to choose the bad ending first. And then you get this absolute emotional gut punch of having everything that you worked so hard for in the game just ripped away from you. You really spend so much time in this game getting to know each character, each creature. You spend a lot of time and energy figuring out how to help them and win their affection, and then they're all just ripped away from you. So when you go back and you make the correct choice to open the door, you can appreciate what the game is telling you with this ending. It wants you to take the lessons that you learned in this video game, making the most of your limited time on Earth, and get more out of each minute by helping others, into your real life, and to make your own life meaningful, helping others. We'll come back to this because later on in the year I played Stray Children, which is a spiritual successor to Moon Remix, but Moon is now one of my absolute favorite games of all time. I really think that everybody should play it. You can finish the game without using a guide, but the puzzles are often just beyond what's intuitive. I would find myself getting stumped often. I'd have to try lots of different things before figuring out something that would work and that would allow me to progress in the game. Or I would need to reread dialogue multiple times and write it all down so that I could see it all next to each other to be able to sort it all out. It really did feel amazing to solve each of these puzzles on my own. The Mushroom Forest puzzle might be one of my favorites in any video game ever. However, there are detailed guides online, and there are guides with spoiler tags so that if you're stumped, you can reveal just a hint, 1 or 2 hints, or if you really can't figure it out, you can reveal the whole solution to each puzzle, just to get unstuck so that you can see more of the game. I really have to praise the puzzle design in this game. It really felt expertly crafted so that the answer was never obvious, but it wasn't impossible to figure out. So if you were ever on the fence about trying it, but you're like not in the mood to have to try and solve everything, or you know you're gonna put the game down if you get stumped, play it with a guide. There's good guides out there that'll help you get through it, because I really would rather people play this game at all, first of all, and then be able to finish it than never give it a try, just because they got stumped and had to give up like I did the first time that I played it. Ultimately, I 100%ed the game this time by collecting every single love in the game, and while I was doing that, I had no idea if that was going to pay off at all. But I think because I invested so much time and energy into 100%ing it, it made the ending of the game so much more impactful. Okay, now we've talked about Moon. Let's go back in time 1 month to when I played Chibi Robo. So I first played Chibi Robo for the very first time in 2014, probably. It was a game that I always wanted to try since I read about it in Nintendo Power when it first came out, because it looked right up my alley. It looked like a cute and quirky game like Katamari, but I could not find it anywhere in stores. It was impossible to find. I looked for it and I couldn't find it. When I started dating Chaz in 2014, It turned out that he owned a copy of the game, and he played it when it was new, way back in like 2006. So I got to try it for the very first time around 10 years ago. And it not only lived up to my expectations of being a cute and quirky game, but I actually found it incredibly moving as well. In the same vein as Moon Remix RPG, Chibi Robo is another game that plays with the idea of servitude providing meaning in life, and time being the main antagonist. So, if you didn't know this, Chibi Robo and Undertale are related. The story begins as Mr. Sanderson gets a cleaning robot for his daughter Jenny's birthday. Mr. Sanderson is currently unemployed when the game starts, and the family can't afford this purchase, which causes conflict between him and Mrs. Sanderson. Jenny is their daughter who only makes ribbit noises. Sienna says hello. So you play as Chibi Robo, the cleaning robot. I'll let Sienna out. He has a limited battery life, but as he helps the family around the house by cleaning and solving problems for them, he earns happy points, which are this game's equivalent of love. Happy points can be spent upgrading the battery, which allows Chibi to clean longer between charges. When you run out of battery, you have to plug into a wall outlet and recharge. And you can also buy time upgrades, which extend the clock. The game originally starts by allowing you to only play for 5 minutes each night and each day. And when that time is over, it moves on to the next day. But it can be extended for 15-minute sessions each. Instead of a full RPG world to explore, Chibi Robo is just a couple inches tall. This amiibo is life-size. And the game takes place entirely in the Sanderson household, which you can explore more fully as you earn more happy points to unlock more abilities for Chibi Robo. The Sandersons are a troubled, dysfunctional family, and the toys in the house are alive. By helping each character in the game, by providing services like cleaning, finding lost items, and occasionally facilitating communication, Chibi's good deeds not only make their lives easier, but also allows the family and the toys to resolve their conflicts and grow closer. As someone who grew up in a dysfunctional family myself, I know that in reality, kindness to yourself and even to your family doesn't always mean doing endless acts of service for them, and sometimes helping them too much and self-sacrificing can sometimes actually contribute to problems instead of resolving them. So personally, I don't see Chibi Robo's story as quite as prescriptive as Moon's, which was, in contrast, pretty directly telling players to go out into their real world and live in service of their communities. Instead, to me, Chibi Robo is more of a wish fulfillment scenario. Wouldn't it have been nice if you really could have just been good enough to fix your family and come out of it with the nice, loving parents that you never had? That would be nice if that was possible or realistic. And in that way, it's nice to live out that fantasy in a video game, even if it is always just a fantasy. Chibi Robo is made by a lot of the same people who made Moon Remix RPG under a new company. So Moon Remix was made by a company called Love Delic, and Chibi Robo was made by Skip, but they have the same director, Kenichi Nishi. Dao the dog is in both games, and actually the first time I played Moon in 2020, I was totally shocked that Dao was there, because I had no idea of the connection between the two games. In fact, there's basically a prototype version of the family in Chibi Robo in Moon Remix RPG. The family that has Paragon in the American household is very similar to the Sandersons, and they even have similar voices.
Sounds like you put it down like oh shit. Finger sounds like oh shit sounds like.
Oh, he's old. Sheep me talk sheep as a year.
Cement fun to come and I did not sob. Do you think they will? Cement fun sob. Do you think they will? Cement fun to come and
But says she loves it. Load recipe. Just me to play it. Load recipe worth about.
In Moon, one of the ways to get a Hager badge is to open the family's fridge at night. The mom will come out and tell you that she got the badge so that she could get a robot made from Dr. Hager. The puzzles in Chibi Robo are overall much simpler than Moon's. It's an easier, shorter game than Moon Remix RPG, and it only took me a few days to beat it fully. But it is a really charming and wonderful game, and I'm happy that it's now accessible to more people. It makes me miss a time when I believed that technology would continue to make our lives better, or solve existential problems like the energy crisis. Playing it in 2025 certainly makes that aspect of it much more bittersweet. I finished it the first time that I played it 10 years ago, but this time I fully 100%ed it, and I even maxed out my happy points and moolah before I put the game down. So with that, we're back to chronological order again. I played Chibi Robo, then Moon, and then after Moon, I played Earthbound. So after I finally finished Moon in September, which was a game that I started originally in 2020, and has been on my backlog for years since then, I thought, why not go back and finish some of the other games that I had started in 2020 and also put down around that time. I first started playing Earthbound on the Wii U in 2020, and I got up through the swamp area, the deep darkness, before abandoning the playthrough, and that was mostly because I hate the Wii U that much. I just hated using it that much that I couldn't finish the game. Now that Earthbound is also on NSO and much more accessible, I could finish Earthbound and not have to use the Wii U at all. So I did. I finished Earthbound completely in September. So Earthbound is another great RPG that is also subversive of the genre of RPGs. I've mentioned in past videos that there was kind of an RPG boom in the late 80s in Japan. And so a lot of RPGs that came after Dragon Quest, which is really the grandfather of RPGs, are different takes on Dragon Quest or sort of subversions of the idea, and Earthbound is no exception. So Moon Remix was a subversion of Dragon Quest by asking, what if a real hero helps instead of killing monsters? Earthbound asks, what if Dragon Quest, but it's in a suburb, and you're fighting with coffee cups and crows and fire hydrants. So Shigesato Itoi, I think, originally a famous writer in Japan. It's actually kind of hard to get a clear idea of what Itoi was most known for by reading his Wikipedia article, because he did a lot of things, but he was already a well-known person before making Earthbound, and he was a writer. And after he played Dragon Quest, he decided he wanted to do this modern-day subversion of Dragon Quest, and he approached Shigeru Miyamoto with the idea. Miyamoto was supposedly hesitant at first to grant what was essentially a vanity project to a then known celebrity. Having a writer create an RPG actually ended up resulting in some pretty well-written dialogue with lots of personality and humor. So I would say that worked out pretty good. I laughed out loud multiple times playing Earthbound. I was always curious about Earthbound because it's essentially an older sibling of Pokemon, being the game series that launched Tsunekaze Ishihara's career and the beginnings of the company Creatures, who are made up of Ape alumni, and Ape is the company that developed the Earthbound games. Aesthetically, there certainly is some overlap between Earthbound and Pokemon. They're both modern-day RPGs with bikes and malls, and some of the creatures have some things in common, like Mewtwo and Geeg from Earthbound Beginnings look very similar, and obviously the protagonists of both games are young boys with baseball caps. But mechanically, they're actually really distinct as RPGs, and there's really not very much in common with how they're built under the hood. Pokemon has its defining RPG feature, which is that you have over 100 different party members to choose from, and Earthbound plays with swapping out different party members at different parts of the story, but you still only have a set group of 4 to work with, and they're also not especially customizable. There's always sort of a correct answer for what would be the best thing to equip on them at any point in the game, and a thing that each character is best at. And what's really noticeably different between early Pokemon and Earthbound is just the way the speed stat works. In Pokemon, speed is king. It determines not only critical hits, but it's a very consistent way to determine which side of the field is going to go first in any battle. Higher speed equals going first. In Earthbound, turn order is influenced by speed, but it is randomized on top of the speed stat. It can be really unpredictable what order everyone is going to go in any fight. For another, in Earthbound, status is completely punishing. You cannot use items to cure paralysis in Earthbound while paralyzed. If you think about it, it does actually make sense from a role-playing perspective, because if you're paralyzed, you would not be able to move your body to use an item. And in Pokemon, that's not the case because the trainer is the one that uses the items when the Pokemon are paralyzed. So it doesn't matter if Pokemon themselves are not able to move, a trainer can always heal them in battle using a healing item. But that means in Earthbound, the only way to consistently get rid of status effects is to fully leave the area and pay a doctor to heal you, or to use up your very limited resource of psi powers or power points for your psi powers. So it can get really difficult to manage PP late in Earthbound because you run into a lot of enemies that'll deal status effects and also have the capacity to kill you if you're not using your strongest psi attacks to kill them as fast as possible. So this is the first RPG that I've ever played where most people's late game advice is to just run from enemies until the final boss. It's also a kind of flexible system where damage rolls down. Your damage counter is almost like a flip clock that just slowly flips over as your HP drains. And if you can end the fight before those numbers animate to 0, once you're dealt lethal damage, you can actually escape the battle without fainting, which is a unique quirk of Earthbound as well. So most people say you should always use a guide your first time playing Earthbound, and in fact the game was originally sold with a guidebook. It was bundled with one, which is part of the reason why it's so rare now, is it was an expensive game because it had to come with the guidebook. But contrary to popular belief, I actually found it not that difficult to progress through without using external information from a guide about what I should be doing at any given time. Certainly, immediately after finishing Moon and solving some puzzles in that game without help, Earthbound is pretty straightforward most of the time. Also, many people find Earthbound to be an extremely moving game, and I do find that since I played it immediately after Moon Remix, which I thought was a very moving game, it sort of robbed Earthbound of its impact for me a little bit, because it was really hard for anything to follow that up and beat a game that made me feel so much and had as much impact as Moon Remix did. But the ending of the game is really intense, and I imagine if you played it on a CRT in like 1995, you would be terrified. You would think your TV was about to explode. So in October, after I finished Earthbound, I decided, why not give Earthbound Beginnings a try? I was curious about it. It's also available on NSO. And I thought, okay, people said you needed a guide for Earthbound, but I didn't need one. So I'm going to go into Earthbound Beginnings with no guide and just see how I do. Even though I was expecting it to be significantly harder than Earthbound, I was just feeling like I wanted to figure it out on its own terms and didn't feel like using a guide. So I basically immediately made several decisions that made the beginning of the game way harder than it needed to be. And after I wandered in the wrong direction and died to an enemy quite a bit higher level than me immediately, I decided ultimately that I would start over and use a guide after all. It is fascinating to play a late 80s RPG where you can make so many wrong decisions right away that can be incredibly punishing. For example, in Earthbound Beginnings, you get a loaf of bread very early in the game. If you use bread, you get crumbs. The crumbs can be used as a warp to return to wherever you originally used the bread. However, if you eat the bread, you do not get crumbs and you lose the bread, essentially wasting the item. I needed to heal early in the game and I had no idea what the bread did. So in my first attempt at playing this game, I tried to use the bread to regain HP and accidentally made a warp point directly to an area full of enemies instead of to a safe place that I would need to return to later, which is where you ideally would use the bread. The map is also very open, so you can instantly go in any given direction and get destroyed by enemies that you're not ready for at all. And it isn't like Earthbound or like more modern RPGs where you can just talk to people in the game to get an idea of what you need to do or where to go next, or like Moon, where you can experiment and kind of figure that out on your own. Instead, it's the kind of game that requires you to be basically clairvoyant to make a correct decision to progress through the game, instead of an incorrect one that will either get you killed or waste an item that you need, or say the wrong thing in a conversation to have a character not give you something that you need. So you can make decisions while playing Earthbound Beginnings, but ultimately only one decision is ever the correct one. So this is a game I definitely would use a guide for, and be very patient. I think that as an exercise in imagining what it was like to play a video game in Japan back in the late 80s, it is a fascinating look into another period of time, and the kind of patience people used to have back when life was so much less stimulating. The game gives you so little information to work with, and is so punishing that I imagine playing it with no guide originally would have taken over a year to finish. I got up through Snowman in my playthrough, and I had to put it down for now because so many games came out at the end of the year that I needed to play. But maybe I will go back to it and finish it Sunday when I get through all of these games that I'm playing now. In October, we got Sonic Racing Crossworlds. This was a huge year for racing games, and Sonic Racing Crossworlds basically gave me everything that I wished I got from Mario Kart World but didn't. In Sonic Crossworlds, it's extremely fast, of course, like you'd expect from a Sonic game. The level design, the course design in Sonic Crossworlds is superb. It's very reminiscent of 3D Sonic level design, which makes it fun to find the best path through each level, and the laps are short enough that you can learn each course and get quite good at them. And each course feels very distinct from each other, and none of them feel boring or like clones. And there's some skill involved in gameplay still, mostly because there is so much customization involved in building your vehicle and your gadgets. You can get very granular with it in setting up your machine and customizing equipment and designing the stats from the jump, which makes it fun to experiment with different gadgets and builds. And the game is full of Sonic fan service, which I'm a Sonic fan, so for me, it's very gratifying. I know some people really love Mario Kart World for the music and the new arrangements of known familiar Mario tracks, but since I'm a Sonic kid at heart, I would still much rather race to Metal Harbor, and that's what Sonic Crossworlds lets me do. I imagine how I feel about Sonic Crossworlds is how people who actually like Mario feel about Mario Kart. And my husband was super thrilled to have a racing game where he could play as Hatsune Miku. So the only downside to this one was that when we got the game in October, the Switch 2 version was not available yet. So we were playing the Switch 1 game with really muddy textures and some performance limitations instead of a Switch 2 game on our brand new Switch 2. But Sonic Crossworlds is now currently available for Switch 2 as of early December. So we were able to upgrade it, and it does look a lot better. And they're still adding new characters to the game even this far after release. Just this week, Knights came out, so I'm very excited to go back and try Knights in the game. And there's really just like a ton of stuff to unlock in this game in terms of like gadgets, machine parts, characters, character skins, racing modes, titles. So you can really be busy with this game for ages trying to get everything. But we basically just settled for unlocking Supersonic Racing, which means that we beat all of the rivals in the game. And then we moved on to Kirby Air Riders when that game came out, which I'll get to in a moment. So in October, Pokemon Legends ZA was released. So I have mixed feelings on Legends ZA. First, I want to say that I did actually enjoy playing the main game. I think that the battle system is a massive improvement over Legends Arceus, and the scope of the game mostly allowed the mechanics that they did include to be healthy and feel polished. The combat is fun, it's snappy, and it's exciting to see how each Pokemon is used in the new system. A fast Pokemon like Starmie, classic Starmie for example, isn't going to always get the first strike if you have its iconic Bolt Beam moveset on it, because each of those moves takes a while to animate. So you have to learn this new system to master it. And it was actually really fun to put together movesets, try new things. I was making use of Pokemon that I normally don't bother with for a main game, like Aggron, for example. For the very first time, Pokemon is fully an action RPG in this title, and that's pretty exciting. And I did like the characters. I felt that they were all distinct, and they were fun to hang out with, good dialogue in this game. And it was fun to find references to X and Y all over the place. Somewhat fond memories of X and Y despite some things about them. but it is kind of a lean meal, even if it is sometimes a tasty one. An ideal Legends game would have combined the bigger maps of Legends Arceus and the expanded role-playing mechanics like crafting and foraging with the combat system that they introduced here, but they didn't have room to do both, and it shows. It's a game that is really pretty light on unique content, and relies on repetitive gameplay loops in the same few areas to keep you entertained. There aren't a lot of varied locations in the game, and Lumio City unfortunately really is just a bunch of buildings that make up walls for samey looking totally flat corridors that you run down. All of the rooftops more or less look the same too, and the city does not, to me, feel like a real place that could exist. It continues the trend as well of shops just being menus that you open as opposed to places that have interiors that you can go into and explore. And the gameplay loop is more or less the same thing over and over again, battling the same 6 or so main characters on a loop throughout the story, and doing the same battle royale every night to grind for points. The DLC makes this even more apparent by not bothering to make unique locations at all, and reusing the same 3 maps over and over and over again. I heard one of the boss battles doesn't have a map at all, and is just a completely pitch black void. The grind feels very tiring when you add in needing to grind out berries, donuts, and candies to keep up with the steep level curve, and continue accessing higher level distortions. And the time limit in each distortion guarantees that you'll need to do more than one of each new level you reach to earn enough berries to get to the next one, and so on. It's a gameplay loop that I don't feel like is super engaging for its own sake, and it doesn't really allow for any of the things that I normally find fun about Pokemon games, even Legends Arceus. There's no exploration possible on these tiny reused maps. There's not really a lot of team building happening when everything needs to be so maxed out, and I don't feel particularly rewarded for participating in this loop when clearing one just grants me consumables needed to access another tiny identical room to the last one I was just in. The novelty of finding new megas is really the only thing driving the DLC forward to me. That is going to have little to no replay value, and is really relying on the popularity of the Pokemon brand itself more than the actual strength of the gameplay. This is a shame because the Scarlet and Violet DLC, I felt, was significantly stronger than the main SV game content, but this DLC feels like it's not of the same caliber. That said, I do feel guilty that I don't particularly like this, because the Mega Dimensions DLC is incredibly challenging, single-player content in a Pokemon game, which I have been begging for literally a decade. So it feels like biting the hand that feeds me to say thanks for the challenge finally, but I don't like this. And I know that not adopting this enthusiastically is going to give them the wrong message that the challenge isn't what people want. But it is. And the new battle system has a lot of potential if it's ever integrated with a game that actually has more stuff going on. So it feels like it is a step in the right direction for them. But Pokemon has been taking steps in the right direction for over 10 years now, and has yet to make a game that feels like everything that they've been building to is actually coming together into something great. Pokemon is just perpetually laying tracks for a train that never quite shows up. Okay, after Pokemon came out, in October, Once Upon a Katamari was released. This was weirdly my most anticipated game of the year behind Kirby Air Riders. I was looking forward to it so much, and unfortunately, it was just okay. I am such a Katamari fanatic that I will play even the lowest quality Katamari garbage out there. I played the iPad game in the 2010s, and this wasn't as bad as the iPad game, but it was markedly worse than every other console Katamari game. If you are going to get this, do not get the Switch version. I was hoping there would be a Switch 2 version, but there isn't. And the Switch version has some really bad pop-in on levels that is not present in other versions of the game. And worst of all, it has a tendency to crash on loading screens after completing a level pretty frequently. Some people say it's not that bad for them, but for me, it was really often. So for example, if you put in a lot of time trying to do something really difficult, like getting the Cowbear, you would risk losing that run when the level ends and you go to save your results, because the game could crash. This happened to me on as large as possible 5 the first time I got big enough to roll up the High King, and I had to do it again. Second, It is hard to mess up Katamari. It's just a really good concept. But they did needlessly change the engine in this game from the reroll engine, and for the worse. This is the same engine that is in the mobile game, Katamari Rolling Live. And this was done so that both games could be developed simultaneously. I wish that they hadn't used it, because it's a significantly worse engine. In previous Katamaris, the game determines how big you need to be to roll something up by the volume of an object. So for example, if something was very tall but really narrow, like significantly more narrow than the Katamari, it would have less overall volume than the Katamari, and you would be able to roll it up. It was very intuitive. And if you were just slightly under the volume that you needed to be larger than the object to roll it up, you would crash into it and the object would wobble, indicating that you were almost big enough to get it, but not quite. In Once Upon a Katamari, they changed it from volume to height. So the height of the Katamari now determines how large you need to be to roll something up. So anything that's very tall but extremely narrow, often going to be deceptively large. And as large as possible for example, there are people on extremely tall ladders just going into the 5 to 7 meter section, probably 3 to 7 meter section. So they're extremely tall but very, very narrow. And you can't roll these up if you're shorter than the ladders, even if your overall mass is several times more. The ultimate result is that it's now extremely easy to get stuck crashing into an object that you can't see because it's so much more narrow than the Katamari that the clump totally obscures it from view. But even though you can't see it, the game has determined that you're just not big enough to roll it up. This is compounded by the fact that almost nothing in this game wobbles, indicating that you are almost large enough to roll it up. For some reason, everything is a hard crash that stops all of your momentum. And this wouldn't be so bad if the levels were not all teeny tiny narrow little hallways. So it's extremely easy to become too large and to get stuck in one of these spaces, and it's hard to get far enough away from objects that you're not big enough to roll up to prevent crashing into them constantly. So this is a much clunkier Katamari game than any other in the series, and the poor level design makes the catalog almost impossible to complete. There are 4 objects in the game that require you to roll up every single object in a level from smallest to largest in order to obtain them, so that nothing too small gets loaded out by sizing up out of the size range so that you can reach an impossible diameter in that level, which to me is an indicator of poor level design, because this has never been the case in any other Katamari game. Combine this with some confusing art direction choices and the king talking way too much mid-level, there being cutscenes mid-level that constantly interrupt the flow of the game, and like several billion tiny parasitic mechanics that need to be explained and fleshed out and collected, and this is probably my least favorite main entry into the Katamari series. I gave it an earnest attempt. I tried to 100% complete the catalog. Because it's Katamari, and Katamari is still fun even when it's done poorly. Poor quality cannot ruin the concept enough to stop me from enjoying it altogether. And it was actually surprisingly fun to work together with the community of Katamari to put together a spreadsheet of every item in the game to catalog its size and location so that other people can complete the collection too. I've never been this early to a Katamari game before, so I never got to be part of this documenting process. But it is disappointing to see the series move in this direction, especially after so long with no new games. And it's honestly kind of disgusting to me that they released a Switch version at all in the state that it's in. Bandai Namco often makes good games. They made new Pokemon Snap, and they've made good Katamari games in the past, like Beautiful Katamari, where the levels were large and expansive, and the rolling felt very fluid and intuitive, and was actually more forgiving than the original games. It's a shame that they've sunk to this state of making something that feels like a rushed, sloppy cash grab. Alright, we're in the home stretch, 2 games left. In November, as I had those 4 impossible items left to collect in Katamari, Stray Children was released, so I put down Katamari to play it. So on YouTube, Kimura Yoshiro has a video uploaded to the Onion Games channel where he talks about what was originally planned for a cut ending of Moon Remix RPG. This ending was ultimately scrapped when it was decided that the game should end on the moon, but fans found the unused content on the disc. Kimura was so embarrassed that this ending was found when it wasn't meant to, that he made a video to explain it.
この話をね、どうしたものかなと思うので、なぜ、あのゲームのロムの中に没エンドのマップがあるのか。それは昔は没にしたものを後からああやって解析して見れる人がいるなんて思ってもみなかったからなんとなくまあマップのつながりを切っとけば大丈夫かなと、イベントデータなくしとけばマップ飛ばないかなと思って適当に軽く削除したんですよそしたらちゃんと解析する人が現れて出たみたいな恥ずかしいなこの話恥ずかしすぎるな、ヘボいでしょ。で没にした理由っていうのはまあ様々な理由があるんだけど、まあ一つはなんかバババって突然こうひらめいて、なんかこう月の世界はきっと粘土でできてるんだろうなとか、そういうこうなんかこうなんだろう、まあなんだろうな、モンスターの行き場所みたいなやつを、その魂の行き場所を死後の世界じゃなくて物理的ななんか月に帰ってた方が面白いやんみたいな感じになって、でその時にあーって思ったのよなんかこうそっちの方が面白いわと思って。
So this ending was inspired directly by Night on the Galactic Railroad, and the original ending of the game would have had spirits of monsters killed by the hero in the game world and people who died in the real world outside of the game, all lining up to go to the afterlife. At the front of the line, the boy who was playing the game in the real world would be sitting there crying. Each time a soul reached the front, he would heal their wounds and send them to the afterlife. But he would turn more and more into a dragon each time, and eventually he became the dragon that the hero was sent to kill. Keep this ending in mind. Stray Children begins with the player who's a boy who's also a dog, and he's home alone. His dad hasn't come home in a long time, so he goes out to look for him. Eventually, a friend of his dad tells him that his dad had a secret hideout. Turns out his dad was the developer of an RPG that was never released called Moon. The boy gets sucked into this game, and it's implied that the dad is probably in the game too. And when you get there, it's the town and all of the characters from Moon Remix RPG. But it's all falling apart, and no one can remember anything. Eventually, the events of the original cut ending from Moon Remix RPG take place, and the dragon begs you to kill him. It's so eerie and uncanny to see this world that you spent so much time in Moon and fall in love with that world and then see it fall into despair and disrepair like this. So right off the bat, Stray Children is pulling no punches. When the world finally falls apart altogether, the boy wakes up on a strange adventure, and the real game of Stray Children begins. What's odd about Stray Children is that other than this opening, it's not really anything like Moon in gameplay. There's no time mechanic and no love to collect. Instead, it takes its cues from Undertale. Undertale just keeps coming back up. As I mentioned earlier, Undertale was inspired directly by Moon Remix RPG originally. So it's incredibly meta in that way that a spiritual successor to Moon is now taking its cues from Undertale, which Kimura has confirmed on his YouTube channel. So instead of having Moon Remix's mechanics, Stray Children is an incredibly linear game with no open world at all. In Moon, you could go back to earlier areas and collect clues that you missed, or revisit things and reread dialogue to help figure out puzzles. Well, in Stray Children, there's no backtracking allowed. Each previous area is actually sealed off as you leave it. And if I remember correctly, Undertale doesn't even do this. So this is a unique strictness to Stray Children. So in Stray Children, there's creatures called Ulders, which is each the spirit of some sad adult with unresolved emotions from their life. So they're like dead adults with their spirits that you have to catch, kind of like Moon. Like Undertale, you can either kill these spirits or save them. And you do so by surviving a series of bullet hell puzzles, very much like Undertale. Like, the gameplay is almost one-to-one the same. Each older has a unique puzzle to solve to say the right things to them in combat to open their hearts and end the battle peacefully. However, where this game is quite a bit more frustrating than Moon, and this is on purpose, is the fact that there's no backtracking. So if you're stumped by something, you really don't have a choice but to move forward anyway and leave it behind. So you're going to miss some things on your first playthrough unless you use a guide to make sure you don't miss anything. And I think that they want you to miss stuff on your first playthrough so that you play through the game multiple times in order to see everything, and you learn a little bit more each time. The solutions to saving each of the Olders, much like in Moon Remix RPG, you get the hints for saving them by finding their corpses in the overworld, but the battles are random encounters, and the Olders can appear before you have the chance to find their corpse. So in this case, if you run into an Older before you find the hint to save them, you probably actually want to run from the encounter to avoid having to fight them right away. From what I have heard from other people, you can actually choose to fight and kill Olders multiple times. They only disappear from the game once you save them. So if you kill them once, you still have the opportunity to go back and save them. So actually, whether or not you kill or save Olders doesn't determine your ending in this game at all. And some people argue that you do want to actually kill some of them in order to level up, so that you have a way to make progress in the game in case you miss something that you need to peacefully end certain mandatory battles. So the boss fights in the game all have a missable item, basically, that you need to get before the fight begins to solve the fight peacefully. So if you miss that item, you need to be able to kill the bosses in order to continue to make progress in the story. So some people say you should fight the Olders and then save them, just so that you're leveled up enough to take on bosses for items that you miss. There are some Olders late in the game that require items that are dropped by Olders earlier in the game, but only under very specific circumstances. So most people miss those items and they're very difficult to get. So yeah, it's definitely not the same game as Moon at all. And it does feel very weird to play a game commenting on the legacy of Moon Remix RPG by going through and killing monsters. And it feels so wrong that I tried very hard to save every single one without killing any. I'm not far enough in the game to comment on whether or not it pays off or what the goal of these mechanics is trying to do, because I ultimately got to the 5th world and then put the game down when Kirby Air Ride came out. I will probably finish this game someday once I go back to it, and it might actually be beneficial to wait a while and then come back, because currently there's almost no fan resources for the game. So if you did want to follow the game with a guide, there's like no guides available, and the ones that are in Japanese. I'm hoping eventually somebody will finish this game and make a spoiler tagged guide for it, the way that the fans have done for Moon Remix RPG. So I hope that happens someday. So despite having much more friction and difficulty than Moon, I do want to see the end of this game and find out what it has to say. I'm pretty confident that the friction is saying something and it'll be worth it, but I'm not sure what. I have faith in this team. So we're on the last game finally, and that is Kirby Air Riders. I think I've never been so excited for a new game in my entire life. I'm pretty cynical. I'm usually too cynical to let myself get excited for anything. I hate being disappointed. After years of bad follow-ups to good games, it's just taught me that liking one game is not a guarantee that I'm gonna like the next, and there are very rare exceptions to this where I like every game in a series. But Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube has been one of my most played games throughout my whole life. It's such an endlessly playable game that I wasn't sure how they were going to improve on the concept, and I had some doubts that they could even do justice to the original, even though I was still looking forward to it all year. But not only did they keep what I loved about the original Kirby Air Ride intact, Everything new that they added only elevates what was already a great concept. City Trial is the open world couch racing game done right. I love so many of the new machines and events, when I doubted that anything could dethrone my affection for the Shadow Star. I even like playing online in ranked City Trial, which is something that I can't believe I'm saying. When the City Trial demos came out earlier in the year, I found them way too chaotic, and I was like, this is not the game that I know and love, and I was very afraid that I wouldn't like City Trial at all. But I just really needed some time to adjust to the new speed of the game, and get used to kind of letting go and having fun tearing other people apart. Like, I'm not typically an aggressive player in almost any video game, but it's fun to be aggressive in City Trial. I think just because the stakes are so low, like, you can do really, really well in City Trial and then still lose in the event. It just really doesn't matter. It's like 5 minutes of time and a scramble to get stuff, and then whoever does well, and whoever doesn't. So I guess fun to vent some aggression on people for something that is just so inconsequential. And I also already loved Rick, my boy Rick, so I love that he's such a star in this game. Chaz and I, together, have already 100%ed all of the checklists in the game, except for the online checklist, which we're slowly filling out. Every time there's a new event online, we drop everything to play. My few complaints about the game have already been fixed in patches, and I think the only thing missing from this version of the game that would fully make the original release obsolete would be legacy versions of the original City Trial map and copy abilities, and I think the original top ride courses, and maybe some legacy checklists. But otherwise, you can adjust it to play almost identical to the original at the same speed, and all of the original air ride courses are there. And really, I couldn't be happier with this game. And it's so rare that something brand new and untested just thrills me right out the gate like this. I mean, it is a remake, essentially, of a game I already liked, but I typically hate those. So even after the Legends ZA DLC came out, this is what I'm looking forward to playing each night, and is probably the main reason I haven't made very much progress in Legends ZA. Well, in the DLC anyway. So that is everything. I have been talking your ear off for a long time, but I feel like I covered everything. I'll probably put the uncut version of what I wrote on my first draft with all the stuff I cut out of this one as a linked file on Patreon. Sorry for YouTube people, I don't know how to, I think that there's basically no way I can show people on YouTube this, but I'll put it on Patreon. Tell me about games that you played this year. I want to know. Add more to my backlog. Tell me what I should play. I still haven't played Clair Obscur, which everyone says I should play. One of my friends says that he is gonna play it during his sabbatical in February, so he's like, all you guys should play it during February so we can all play it at the same time. So I'll probably try it then. Yeah, and then eventually I'll get back to Stray Children. I want to know how it ends. It's a tough game. Hard also for anything to compete with Kirby. So yeah, big year for me. Pokemon, Kirby, Katamari, Tomb Raider. Yeah, it's fun to be a millennial now, because we're the ones that everything caters to. And in not too long, Gen Z, it'll be your turn. Don't worry. It'll probably happen faster for Gen Z than it did for us, because everything is so, there's no monoculture anymore, so people are able to tap into the interests of Gen Z much sooner than they would be otherwise, because everything is made for tiny little niches now. Okay, I think that's everything. I'm gonna go. I hope 2026 is a better year for us all. I'm babbling now. I'm gonna go. Bye!